To look at what's going to change in 12 months, we kind of have to look at where we are now and where we're heading, because that's what's really going to determine that change. So as we're looking ahead, what we're seeing salespeople doing, what we're seeing companies doing is they're trying to find what are the right markets or the right segments that we should be focusing on, because this is not a monolithic crisis. Yes, it's happening to everybody, but it's affecting different segments differently as well. So as we're coming out of this, we're going to have to find out where we need to be lining up in terms of the right segments.
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman Podcast, the world's most downloaded B2B sales show. If you haven't already, make sure to click subscribe. And on today's show, we have the legend Mark Donnolo. He is the founder over at SalesGlobe. And on today's episode, we're getting into how we can grow our accounts in the new economy, which is forming all around us right now. There's a ton of step-by-steps. There's a ton of good ideas in this episode for you, Sales Nation. And so with that said, let's jump right into it. So we're going to look at how we can grow our accounts in what we're calling here the new economy or the new marketplace in this episode. And I want to start by asking you, and obviously this is a prediction, right? No one knows for sure. But what do you think is going to change in the economy, in the sales marketplace over the next 12 months? What do you think is going to have changed permanently after this COVID-19 pandemic crisis?
Yeah, I think to look at what's going to change in 12 months, we kind of have to look at where we are now and where we're heading, because that's what's really going to determine that change. So we've been working with a lot of companies in roundtables over the past few weeks with sales professionals, just talking about what they're dealing with. And what we're finding, Will, is that we're going through some different phases or stages here. So the first was really around acclimation, just understanding what's going on and how we're going to adjust in terms of those near close-in deals in the pipeline, and how we're going to get those closed, and how we're going to communicate with customers, the idea of empathizing with customers and just understanding their situation. And then we're moving into more planful action. So we get our footing, and we're kind of in the middle of that phase right now, where companies are figuring out, okay, here's how we need to make adjustments to our offers and our pricing, and this idea of building pipeline beyond the curve. So that's kind of a current thing right now. It's like, forget about selling and focus on helping, right? So we're in the midst of that. And then if you start to look ahead in terms of where we're going beyond the first month, beyond the first couple of months, it's really about building and adjusting. And I think it's going to really lead to the answer to your question, which is, as we're looking ahead, what we're seeing salespeople doing, what we're seeing companies doing, is they're trying to find what are the right markets or the right segments that we should be focusing on, because this is not a monolithic crisis. Yes, it's happening to everybody, but it's affecting different segments differently as well. So as we're coming out of this, we're going to have to find out where we need to be lining up in terms of the right segments, right? So, you may not want to be selling to airlines and hospitality, but you may want to be shifting over to tech, or you may want to be shifting over to other services that are going to do well as we come out of this. So as you look ahead to where we could likely be a year from now, I think what we're going to see is that we're going to see customers that are facing unprecedented challenges. So we don't know where they're going to be. What we know is that they're going to have different priorities in terms of how they work with their customers and the offers that they're providing, and what they've learned, like what we've learned during this crisis, what they've learned that's changed them. So you might be seeing things like your customers changing what their offers are, their products, their pricing. Certainly now we're seeing changes in pricing policy and changes in how companies are configuring offers. So those things are likely to be continuing. And then if you think about things, Will, even outside of sales, like their supply chains, I think we're going to see companies making shifts in terms of where their supply chains are coming from. So manufacturing, probably diversifying outside of Asia or China into other areas, say Latin America, right? So that's going to have shifts on their business. Technology, software, probably also diversifying out of Asia into other markets, perhaps Israel, Ireland, other places like that. So they're going to be having some core business changes. So what's going to be changing? Well, I think it's going to be a few different areas. Because we don't know where they're going to be, I think what we're going to see is that we're going to have to be lining up with this business shift. And I think that the sales organization is going to have to become more professionalized consultants. So the salesperson who was the transactional salesperson, I think over time, and maybe that is a year out from now, that's going to start to shift. That's going to become obsolete. And that's going to be replaced by technology, by AI, and this whole idea. We talk about omni-channel when we sell to customers. Can they work across channels with us? A lot of those things are going to be solved. So, well, the way I'm thinking about this is really going to accelerate the move to what I'm calling the new problem solver. I was talking to a company a few weeks ago, and they said, well, is sales becoming obsolete? Well, yeah, the transactional salesperson is becoming obsolete, but that's going to evolve into the person who is the problem solver. So I want to talk a little bit about that as well. But I'll pause for a second because I got a couple other points I want to bring out about where we might be a year from now.
For sure. Two things here. You've just given us an amazing framework for what we should be doing and thinking about right now, in that maybe this was retrospective for a month or two, but we should be closing any deals in our pipeline that we're just about to close, then perhaps focusing on the empathy side of things. And I don't think salespeople are, there for the customers on an emotional level. Maybe it happens occasionally, but this conversation of empathy we can touch on as well and get into that in a little bit more detail. The third step that you mentioned there was talking about changes. So maybe this happens from higher level down to the individual sales contributors of offers and pricing, but perhaps they should be feeding data back up of the conversations that they're having in the marketplace. So we can touch on that. And then finally, hopefully, in 3, 6, 12 months, or whatever it is, we're going to be looking at future pipeline. I thought that was a really succinct 4-step plan that we can perhaps be looking at in the meantime. But going on to what you shared then, Mark, of future changes, how should salespeople be looking at this from a perspective of what should they be doing right now to start to become a professional, to become a consultant, to become what you call a new problem solver? What should we be doing now so this doesn't just hit us in 12 months like a brick wall and we can start to learn and implement some of these skills right now?
Right. So what's happening right now is actually shaping the way we're going to be. When we're having virtual interactions, and you and I do this all the time because we're on opposite sides of the pond, but we're having virtual interactions with our customers right now, that's forcing us to try to be more intentional about those interactions, right? It's no longer just swinging by and saying hi and just, having a regular sales call. So I think, in terms of preparation, we have to become better at becoming authentic with remote tools. So when we're talking, in conversations like this, we don't have the advantage of sitting face to face and building that relationship. So how can we do that remotely? And this, when you talk to people sometimes by video or by phone, it feels a whole lot different than when you're talking to them in person, right? So one thing is become good at that, become facile at that, and become much more practiced with that, because that's going to be one of the new things. I think barriers are going to drop as well, geographic barriers. So people are going to still want to get back together, but I think people are going to probably be leveraging technology a lot more, which means that maybe we're not getting on airplanes as much, maybe we're not going to hotels as much, but we also aren't bound by the barriers. So our territories don't have to be geographically constrained. So we can probably reach out, and it'll probably be more acceptable. Whereas, a couple of months ago, it'd be like, well, I'd expect to see you in person. Perhaps it becomes more acceptable to work virtually. So that's one thing, becoming a better virtual relationship builder. I think at the core of this is, how can you become a better problem solver? And the reason you need to become a better problem solver is because we don't know what the challenges are going to be ahead. What we have to do is we have to build our methods for working with clients and customers to not just be pulling out the brochure, pulling out what our offer is. And I'll give you an example of this. This is a sales call with a major account that we're involved in recently with a client. And rather than going in and having the conversation with them about what the client wanted, what they did is they leveraged data, and we'll be seeing, I think, more of that as well. They leveraged data and got information to do work on what was going on with that client's problem before they even talked to them. And the way they structured the conversation was, they went in and they said, hey, we want to talk to you about what the problem statement is here. What is it you're trying to solve for? And then we want to tell you some things that we learned from what you shared with us. And we want to further define out what the challenges are behind that. So kind of in a problem-solving method. And then we can start to move ahead in terms of how we might help you. And as we watched this, and we trained them on how to do this, but as we watched this, we saw just a totally different conversation, because what they were doing is they were taking the time to dig in and understand more about the story behind what was happening. And the customer was impressed, and I think they'll end up getting that business. But I see more of that happening, because if we're really problem solving, we're going to have to be doing more of that type of thing rather than just showing up. You just can't show up anymore. So this crisis, I think, is forcing us back to some of the fundamentals of the importance of problem solving selling or consultative selling.
So if we're talking about using data, being more intentional and probably proactive in our presentations before we show up and just vomit a pitch we're doing as you described there with with your customers and your clients, and there's a lack of barriers. Do you think that salespeople are going to be now elevated in their roles and more transactional sales will just disappear? They just will be done by an online order form and people will become more accepting of that?
Right. I think about this idea of how to future-proof your career. And that's an idea that we're working on right now, future-proofing your career. And if we're looking at big future with the big F, which this is kind of leading into, we're doing things like understanding that technology is probably going to take over a lot of these things. So you think in terms of what are the things that could be AI'd or offshored or removed from the salesperson, and those are the things you've got to counter against. So the idea of providing information, the idea of product, features and benefits, the idea of all those transactional things, that stuff can be automated. That AI can take care of that. What can't be automated is the ability to solve problems, at least yet, right? The ability to be creative and come up with ideas. I'm sure we can teach that ultimately to a computer someday. But Will, if I can become a better problem solver and use data to empower that, then that's going to be to my advantage. So that can elevate the salesperson. That turns the salesperson into an advisor, right? Which is what we ultimately want. But that's hard work, and not everybody has those core skills. So that's a lot of what the development and the building people have to be thinking about right now is, do I want to be one of the transactional people that are eventually going to be AI or offshored, or do I want to be somebody who's going to be seen as an advisor and I learn how to become a problem solver?
I know, just as an anecdote here, that something that I just threw into our product over at salesman.org was the fact that you do an assessment and there's tons and tons of training, and it just narrows it down into one page, and using the assessment will give you a customized training plan. I just thought it's more seamless. It looks better on the screen. It's almost a visual feature and benefit was my original planning for it. And that is one of the most talked about features from all of our customers when we do reviews with them, that they seemingly have access to all of this data, but they don't want it. They want it narrowed down. And it's not AI. It's not machine learning. It's just a very simple plus this or minus this algorithm that calculates it all. But that to me was an eye-opener of how simple shifts in a product, because that would be a salesperson explaining all the different benefits, almost a consultant saying, well, we recommend you start with this program and this platform and this training and this module. And if you get great results with this with your team, maybe you should look at that. We've automated a lot of it. And, I'm no programmer or developer. We work with a team that we have a team on board that does all that stuff, but I've visualized it. So if I can do it, Microsoft, all these huge organizations must be doing this to, exponential levels higher than what you can even think about, if that makes sense. So is that a shift that we're going to see let me ask you this from another perspective. Is this going to wipe out salespeople's jobs? Because clearly that's coming. Or is this something that is going to push salespeople to add more value in other areas and they will still be needed, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I don't think sales is ever going to go away. And in transactional selling, there'll always be a place for that in some form. What I'm talking about is how do you succeed in the next economy, right? How do you differentiate? So I think there'll always be a place for people to play in the middle of the pack, but how do you get up to those upper percentiles of performance? And I think those are going to be the differentiators. And, you point out a great tool there, Will, which is something that you can automate, but you can also do that through problem solving, which is the idea of simplification. So you've got all these things that you offer, but it's too much. And a company may have all these things that they offer a customer or all these options, but it's too much. So at the core of problem solving is simplification and saying, okay, well, based on all the things that we could do or all the things that you could do, here are really the couple of options you should be looking at. So you could AI that, but in an organic problem-solving situation, that's one of the principles you're going to have to follow is, okay, how do I take a range of possibilities and how do I simplify that? And there is method behind all of this. So you're not just trying to be, creatively brilliant on a whim here. What you're doing is you're going through a problem-solving approach. I mean, one of the best organizations that I saw do this a few years ago is they said, you don't go into the sales call with the brochures anymore. You go in with a pad and a pencil. And you sit there and you listen and you write your ideas down and then you share that way. So there are methods behind how to do this. But I think you bring up a great point about simplification as well.
So if we have a simplification as a layer of value, because I can imagine salespeople prospecting and getting meetings on the back of, hey, we've looked at, or we've worked with 3 of your competitors, we've done this, this, and this. Everyone is strapped for cash, time, money, and we've simplified the supply chain. We've simplified this. We've implemented our product and removed 5 other products from the marketing stack or whatever it is. So if simplification is a layer of value that we could add, are there any other layers of value that we could add right now that would be still useful in kind of a year, 2 years from now?
Yeah, so I think if you have an offer like you talked about, customizing and understanding what the customer's real problem is makes a difference. And I'll give you another example. And this is a client that we worked with recently where they were doing pitches to their customers, and some of them were RFP pitches. And these would have been things that you normally would have pulled out and said, okay, what's the closest thing that we have that's similar to this that we've done before, because that's efficient. We can pull that out. And they were pulling those core components, but what they were doing was investigation work ahead of time, looking at the broader context of what the customer was dealing with its competitors, its market, doing the research on publicly available information. So, and they started to front end their proposals and their pitches with this question of the why, right? So why do you want to do this thing? And they were building the case for why they would want to do this in light of the competitive environment. That is just one example. But they were taking something that was an offer that was a standard offer, but they were really putting it into a context of the customer. They started to see the response rate in terms of RFP proposals or pitches go up because those customers are seeing that they were doing deeper thinking behind that. So that's one thing you can do. As you're preparing, and I wanted to bring up a couple of other points, if I could, Will, on preparation to get ready for this. We talked about this in some prior episodes as well. Account planning, right? This one always comes back up, and you hear groans about it. But being actionable about your account planning, particularly now, because you can't just assume that customers are going to have the same needs. So if we're putting the account plans together, but it's not just your head that's doing it as a salesperson, but you're putting a few people together that they either work with you on the account, or you can do these things called brain trust, where you get a couple of people that understand the business but maybe don't know your particular customer situation to challenge your thinking. The idea of putting 2 or 3 heads together on the account planning and thinking ahead post recovery, what's that client going to be likely needing, and how do we keep updating that? That's a really important skill to have and to build. So everybody that hates account planning, sorry, but it works. So account planning and problem solving go together. And the core piece of the account planning, strangely, is understanding the customer's story and understanding what we can do to make a significant difference for them. So digging into that story is extremely important. And then I want to mention one other final point. Get a better quota, right? Because everybody likes that one. You need to get a better quota as you're going out into 2021 because the world is different. And how do you get a better quota? You have to understand what's going into that quota. And the big components that your company is probably looking at, well, sadly, they're probably looking at history, but they can't look at history anymore. So they're taking that and they're projecting it ahead. Mm-hmm. What you need to help your company do, or at least build your case for, is what is my market opportunity? What is my potential? So do your homework and get the information. There are a lot of data sources out there on what your market opportunity is and build your case there. The second side of it is understand what your capacity is to sell. So you don't want unrealistic expectations put upon you. So look at your prior productivity and understand what it is you need for tools to be able to increase your capacity. And those tools could be support, they could be technology tools, they could be job decontaminants, right? So I have to do a certain amount of stuff as a salesperson that's not really selling. How can I get that off my back and onto other support resources? And this is a really fundamental thing, Will. Track your time, know how you're spending your time, because as we're coming out of this, there's going to be a lot of stuff to do. How much time are you able to spend on core selling? And even, using a time tracking tool or an app. We have some of those at SalesGlobe that we use, Sales Time Optimizer. They're good for reps or leaders to be able to see how people are spending their time and to decontaminate those things. And I know whenever I do my time tracking daily, I always say, well, I want to spend, 60% of my time on business development. It never happens. Well, then when you track it, then you can correct it. So those are a couple of other big things. Get a better quota and increase your capacity.
This is one of the reasons I love speaking to you, Mark, because clearly you're a pro at this, because you come at this of the market's changed, everything's changed, you need to discuss your quota. I speak to some salespeople and some, quote unquote experts, and a lot of these episodes never meet. I record them, but they never make it out into the public on a YouTube channel or on the audio side of things, because they'd approach this as an amateur by saying just rah motivational bullshit on top of all of this. So this is why I enjoy these conversations, and where I want to go with that is it appropriate to? Hopefully, I know the answer to this, but is it appropriate to, if your sales manager gives you an outrageous target for next year, to give them a bit of pushback, to ask them to explain it, and then for you to give your 2 cents on it to perhaps narrow it back down to something that is remotely achievable?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Intelligence, information can only help the organization and help you. I think one of the big problems with quotas, and we have a book called Quotas, of course, one of the big problems with quotas is the organization does it the same way that it's always done it. They do it over and over. So if you can bring new information to the table to help your manager better understand that, and maybe help your manager get a better quota for herself or himself, that will help as well. So if you look at some of those foundational principles in the book Quotas, use those to build your case, right? This is like, quotas are a negotiation. And when I work with clients that are working with me from a leadership standpoint, they talk about the negotiation. They go back and forth with the sales manager and with the front line. And the better informed the managers in the front line are, the better quota they get, because they can make their case. So this is not a passive exercise. You need to make your case.
Because I've never debated a quota in my entire life. I've just always accepted it. And 9 times out of 10, I'd hit it and surpass it. But it wasn't even in my worldview when I was in medical device sales that I could, again, not debate it, but I could provide some evidence of, well, this hospital is not doing this year. This is going to do this next year. And obviously, as you described, it spread around. I had a geographic region. So I'd know that my next door neighbor geographically, sales rep wise, would be having a really good year, and perhaps I'd be on for a great end of the year, and the beginning of the year for him would be different. And so it seems now obvious that we could have negotiated all this, and everyone would have been better for it as well.
Well, I think some of it, there's a reality of, there are some companies where you're going to get the number, but no matter what. But think about it from this perspective. If I'm a rep and I go to my manager with some logical thinking and some good data and some good information, and that could benefit my manager, because they could go, wow, I could use that to get a better quota for myself and for my team. That can flow uphill, right? So the manager, might see some benefit in that. So they're, if the manager is enlightened and the manager is a thinker and they're self-motivated for their team, they can use that information for themselves. So, again, it's about building the case, and we can obviously go deeper into that, but I think, you have to be a self-advocate as a salesperson, not just about hitting your numbers, but getting a better number to hit.
Got it. Okay. One thing I want to wrap up on here, Mark, is we want to become a professional, we want to become a consultant, we want to become a new problem solver. How do we shift our perception in the mind of the potential customer if we have not been any of those things so far? Maybe through no fault of our own, because we haven't had to be any of those things to get deals done and there's been a relationship built. How do we now elevate ourselves to a professional consultant, a new problem solver, without just rocking up in a more expensive car and a nicer suit and now calling yourself a consultant?
Yeah. I think there's the dilemma initially that if you've done this for years with a customer or a client and they see you that way, you've got to break out of that mold. So it can certainly be easier to do and easier to practice with new buyers or new clients because they don't have a predefined image of you. I think if you start to have the conversations, obviously you can't show up and go, hey, we're going to take a whole new approach to things, and here's how we're going to look at it. Oh, what did this guy eat for breakfast? But I think you've got to start slowly with, and I always think questions are the most powerful thing, right? So if you start and if you start asking good questions of your customer about what they're trying to solve for, and I usually get into questions about, and it's the classic, the who, what, when, where, why, how kind of questions. I ask questions about, okay, let's take quotas because I'm a consultant. So we want to fix our quota process. Okay, well, we know how to fix your quota process. Well, no, you don't, because you don't even know what my problem is, right? Mm-hmm. So I would start with questions, and I would say, tell me why you want to fix the quota process. How did this start? Who was involved? When did it happen? Who else in the organization was involved? And I would start to understand the story. So if you start asking story-based questions to your customer, and I used quotas as an example, about why you want to solve things or solve that particular problem, that will start to open up the conversation. You're not trying to be brilliant. What you're trying to do is you're trying to understand. Then could be in the same conversation or a follow-up conversation, you flip it around and you say, okay, we talk about the idea of a solution vision. Well, what would it look like, Will, if we were able to fix this particular quota problem? Well, we'd have 70% or 60% of our people hitting goal, and would it be certain parts of the organization, and how would we make that happen? And why would the organization want to do that, right? And you start building the case. But all I'm doing as a salesperson is I'm asking questions about two things: the story, I want to understand really what happened, and then I'm asking questions about what it would look like ahead. And from that, you can then start to pluck out, well, here are the things that we want to solve for. So I think it's incremental in terms of changing your position with a customer. I think you have to, but questions are the easiest place to start with.
Is there a level within the organization that this works best at? Because I imagine if you, Mark, sat down with a CFO, you could ask these questions, you get an intelligent series of answers. Hopefully you're going to ask a question that's going to provoke thought, and it's going to create a new connection and a new answer that wasn't on the table or in the CFO's mind before. So great, it works with you as a true legendary consultant in the space and a CFO of a large organization. But perhaps salespeople aren't selling to CFOs; they're selling to not end users, but middle management. Does it still work, and is it still appropriate at that level as well?
Well, I always want to get to the person that's creating the vision for where they want to go. However, if you're selling to a middle manager, they still have a problem that they're trying to solve for. They've been given this problem, but there's something in their mind that they know, because they're going to make the decision, right? There's something in their mind that they know is going to help them to make that decision. And from a narrow standpoint, it might be, okay, well, I can help them with those decision criteria. But if I can help them expand their thinking a little bit by talking a little bit more broadly, perhaps I can differentiate. So they're not going to hear that. What I want to do, Will, even if it's selling to a middle manager, what I want to do is I want our conversation to feel and sound different than the conversations he's having with my competitors. And I want him to go, wow, these guys are thinking about different things. And, maybe some of that's above my pay grade, but they're actually more concerned about what we're doing, and I think we're going to get something different. So, whether you're working narrow or trying to expand, I think you can still do that with somebody who may not be the most senior person in the organization.
Got it. And I get that answers my a question about perception as well, because if you can ask those questions and at the end of the conversation, the perception has changed because they see you as different to the competitors. I guess what I'm asking here is contrast what we're aiming for with just, it sounds like a good sales title of a book there, contrast selling or something along those lines. But it's contrast what we're looking for versus the competition, versus other people's marketing materials, versus perhaps even what we've done in the past to change this perception.
Yeah, I want them to see me, even if I'm selling a commodity, I want them to see me as somebody that's thinking more broadly and as a better problem solver. But then, as a customer, I'm going to want a good price on that as well. And, you can get to that as a follow-up, but I want them to see me differently. When I talked about some of those win situations before, that was the common thing, is the customer was seeing those sellers as different. And the thing you can also get to is the manager might say, well, okay, I think I need you to talk to my boss because there's some stuff here that I really don't know the answers to, right? And as soon as you get that click, then you're headed in a different place. You're not always going to get that, but I want them to see me different, and I want them to see me that, okay, well, for about the same price or maybe a little bit more, I can get this better solution, this better answer to maybe beyond what we're even trying to solve for. It's a bigger, better answer.
Got it. That makes perfect sense. Mark, I know you did a little bit of preparation before we click record today. Is there anything that we need to include in this conversation? Is there anything I've missed? Is there anything that we should kind of emphasize?
Well, I think that when you're approaching this, we had talked about the idea earlier. Do you want to go after new customers or do you want to go after current customers? And I'm a big proponent of current customers, and it's for this reason, which is the glory, the flash everybody thinks about in sales is, wow, we took down these new customers, right? It's like talking about all your wins in the stock market, but not talking about the base of the portfolio and all the stuff you didn't win at, right? The customers are like, the current customers are like a vein of gold, and we don't pay enough attention to them. So if you think about the three components of growth, it's retention of what you have in your current customer base and current services, it's penetration of your current customers, and then it's acquisition of new customers. Acquisition of new customers takes more work. It is more expensive in terms of cost of sales. It is lower probability. And you go into the retention and the penetration, much higher probabilities. And your cost of sales and your effort is much lower. And most accounts are underpenetrated. So that's where I would be going. That's where I'd be going first. So you really have to think about those components and do your groundwork on your customers. And the thing about your customers that's great is you really know them well, right? So you can probably problem solve better for your current customers than going out into an area where you don't have as much information and there may be incumbents that you're trying to unseat anyway.
Got it. Well, with social distancing, I'd be careful of talking about penetrating customers too much, Mark. But with that, mate, should that be our go-to then? Should that be, we should be focused on everything that we just discussed, tied up in a nice little bow and focus on our current customers right now for the next few months until we get some resolution to everything that's going on around the world?
Your current customers love you. Focus on them, help rather than sell, build pipeline beyond the curve, and think and like we talked about, understand how you can become a better problem solver, because that's what's going to play. And we don't know what the problems are going to be in a year, but that's what's going to play is to the better problem solvers.
Got it. Love it. Mark, I enjoyed this conversation. As I always do, mate, tell us where we can find out more about you and everything that you're doing.
Well, you can go to salesglobe.com and find out more about us. We have a new book out called Quotas with an exclamation point, Design Thinking to Solve Your Biggest Sales Challenge. And that'll help you negotiate a better quota and also help you set a better quota if you're a sales manager. So check that out. And it's got some great stats on quotas, some great tools, and also some ideas on creative problem solving and design thinking, because that is one of the big problems.
Got it. Well, I'll link to the website, the book, everything else that we talked about in this episode of the show over at salesman.org. And with that, Mark, genuinely, I kind of stroked your ego midway through the show, but I genuinely appreciate your thoughts and your insights on this. And so thanks for joining us again on the Salesman Podcast.
Thanks, Phil. Always great talking to you. Take care.